$100 million aircraft designed to fight a war that ended before it ever flew a combat mission. It was canceled once, then resurrected, then stripped of the one mission it was actually designed for. And yet, it has dropped more combat ordnance than any other American aircraft over the last quarter century. How does a machine built to race through Soviet radar at low altitude end up becoming the workhorse of two land wars in landlocked countries? That answer lives inside the engineering decisions and the political accidents that built this airplane. This is the B-1B Lancer, and the machine is stranger than the legend. To understand why the B-1B exists at all, you have to go back to 1969, to a problem the Air Force could not solve with anything it already owned. The B-52 was enormous. It could carry enormous payloads, but it was subsonic, and by the late 1960s, Soviet surface-to-air missiles were getting very good at killing subsonic aircraft. 11 B-52s lost over Hanoi in December 1972-11. If North Vietnamese radar and missiles could do that, what could the full Soviet air defense network do over Moscow? The answer was sobering. The answer was, wipe out the entire fleet. The Advanced Manned Strategic Aircraft Program, AMSA, was the Air Force's response. The requirement was specific: fly low, fly fast, punch through radar before the missiles could track you. Rockwell International won the contract, and the aircraft they designed would eventually be called the B-1A. 4 prototypes were built. They flew. They hit Mach 2.2 at altitude. By every technical measure, the machine worked. Then Jimmy Carter canceled it. June 30, 1977. The program was dead. The reasoning was partly cost. Each aircraft was running well past $100 million, and partly strategic. Carter believed cruise missiles, cheap, small, guided, could do the same penetration job at a fraction of the cost. And for a moment, that logic was sound. But then the world changed. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December 1979, and Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election on a platform of rebuilding American military power. Reagan didn't just want cruise missiles on B-52s. He wanted a penetrating bomber, a machine that could fly low, fast, and deep into Soviet airspace on its own. The B-1A was resurrected, but not exactly as it was. The new version would be called the B-1B, and the differences between A and B tell you almost everything about what this machine actually is. The B-1A was a Mach 2.2 sprinter. The B-1B is a Mach 1.25 endurance athlete with a radar cross-section roughly 1% the size of a B-52. That trade, top speed for stealth, is the B-1B's defining engineering paradox. To get that radar signature down, Rockwell redesigned the engine inlets entirely. The B-1A had fixed geometry inlets that were optimized for Mach 2 airflow. The B-1B's inlets are curved. They physically block the radar return from reaching the engine fan faces. That one change killed Mach 2. The inlets couldn't move enough air at that speed anymore. But it also dropped the radar signature from the size of a house to roughly the size of a large bird. The logic was clear. If Soviet radar couldn't find you until you were already past the defense belt, you didn't need Mach 2. Mach 1.2 at 50 feet off the deck was harder to kill than Mach 2 at altitude. The terrain following system made that possible. The aircraft has a forward-looking radar that feeds continuous terrain data into an autopilot capable of holding the aircraft at 200 feet above ground level, automatically at supersonic speed. Sitting in the cockpit at that altitude and speed, the crew isn't flying the plane. The plane is flying the crew. Then there is the payload. And this is where the B-1B separates itself from every other aircraft in the inventory. The B-1B carries 75,000 pounds of ordnance internally. 75,000. That is more than any other aircraft in the U.S. inventory, more than the B-52, more than the B-2. 3 weapons bays, each one massive. The forward and aft bays are conventional rotary launchers. The center bay is configurable. In a single pass, a B-1B can release 84 Mk-82 500-pound bombs. 84. That is a carpet of explosives covering a target zone larger than most city blocks. But the aircraft was built for a war that never happened, and that is the central fact that defines everything that came after. The B-1B entered service in 1986. The Cold War ended 5 years later, and with it went the entire strategic nuclear mission the aircraft was designed around. The START-I Treaty in 1991 created a problem. The B-1B's nuclear weapons carried counted against American strategic warhead limits. The solution was blunt: remove the nuclear capability entirely. In 1994, under the Nuclear Posture Review, the B-1B was formally converted to conventional-only operations. The nuclear wiring was stripped out. The nuclear bomb racks came out. Here is what nobody expected: removing the nuclear mission made the B-1B better. Without the nuclear launcher constraints, the weapons bays could be reconfigured. Without treaty-counting rules shaping what went in them, the aircraft could finally carry the full range of precision conventional weapons the Air Force had been developing. The B-1B didn't just survive the Cold War's end. The Cold War's end accidentally unlocked what the aircraft could actually do. The first test of that came over Kosovo in 1998. Operation Allied Force. NATO needed to hit Serbian military infrastructure distributed across a densely populated country. The B-1B flew its first combat missions. The swing-wing geometry that made it a nightmare at low level also made it a precision platform at medium altitude with the right weapons. But the real story, the one that changed the aircraft's entire identity, started in October 2001. Afghanistan, landlocked, no coast to operate from, no carrier aircraft range, mountains up to 25,000 feet, targets scattered, mobile, often calling in air support with minutes to spare. This was nothing the B-1B was designed for. Nothing. The mission profile was continuous armed overwatch, circling for 8, 10, 12 hours above ground troops, ready to strike on seconds of notice. The 4 General Electric F-101 engines, each producing around 30,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner, gave the aircraft enormous fuel reserves and range. It could stay overhead longer than almost anything else available, and it carried 75,000 pounds of bombs. When ground troops called for support, the B-1B had reserves to answer that call multiple times in a single sortie. Between 2001 and 2019, the B-1B, a fleet of fewer than 70 aircraft, delivered approximately 40% of all U.S. ordnance dropped in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. 40%. From one aircraft type, one that the Air Force had been trying to retire since 1993. But those combat hours came at a price. The airframe was being worked to its structural limits. The aircraft was not designed for this mission. It was designed for short, violent supersonic dashes through defended airspace, not 10-hour loiter cycles over mountain ranges. The swing wing mechanism, the variable geometry pivot that swept the wings from 15 degrees fully forward to 67.5 degrees fully swept, was absorbing punishment at every angle change. Wing sweep geometry is one of the great engineering compromises of aerospace history. Swept wings give you speed. Unswept wings give you lift efficiency at low speed and during takeoff. The pivot that lets you do both is enormously complex and enormously heavy. The B-1B's wing carry-through box, the structural member that holds the pivots, is a single forged titanium assembly that weighs over 10,000 pounds by itself. It is, in a sense, the spine of the aircraft. And those years of sustained combat operations had put microfractures in some of those carry-through boxes. By 2012, the Air Force had a serious problem. Structural fatigue, aging avionics, a cost per flight hour that had climbed towards $60,000, and a fleet shrinking through attrition. The Air Force proposed retiring the entire B-1B fleet in 2012. Again in 2013. Congress said no. Both times. Why? Because nothing else could replace what the Lancer was doing. Not the B-2. Too few airframes, too expensive per flight hour, and not optimized for conventional payload volume. Not the F-15E. Limited range and payload. Not yet the B-21. The B-1B had become load-bearing infrastructure for American air power. You couldn't pull it out without something else falling. So instead of retiring it, the Air Force did something more expensive and more interesting. They started upgrading it. Continuously. Aggressively. The upgrade program that followed is one of the most sustained aircraft modification efforts in modern aviation history. It has essentially rebuilt the aircraft's mission systems from scratch while keeping the airframe flying. Start with weapons. The original B-1B was not JDAM capable when it entered service. JDAM, the Joint Direct Attack Munition, is a GPS guidance kit that turns a dumb bomb into a precision weapon, accurate to a few meters. Getting the B-1B to talk to JDAMs required rewiring the weapons bays and updating the mission computers. That work was done in the late 1990s, and it changed what the aircraft could do completely. Then came JASSM, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, a stealthy cruise missile with a range of over 200 miles, able to fly itself to a target through GPS and infrared terminal guidance. The B-1B can carry 24 JASSMs internally. 24. That is 24 separate targets, each engaged from outside most adversary air defense envelopes. And then, JASSM-ER. Extended range. Range now exceeds 500 miles in the ER variant. The B-1B becomes a truck that releases 24 missiles from outside the threat radius of virtually any ship-based air defense system in the Pacific, which is how a Cold War Soviet penetration bomber became one of the most credible long-range anti-ship strike platforms in the American inventory, without anyone explicitly designing it to be. The long-range anti-ship missile, LRASM, is now integrated on the B-1B. It is an autonomous weapon that uses onboard sensors to distinguish the correct target vessel in a fleet and choose its own attack angle. A single B-1B releasing a full load of LRASMs poses a threat to a carrier strike group. That sentence would have been incomprehensible in 1986. The avionics have been transformed as well. The original mission computer was a 1970s-era system with processing power comparable to a pocket calculator by modern standards. It has been replaced entirely. The integrated battle station upgrade gave crews large format displays, a modernized navigation system, and a data link architecture that lets the aircraft pass targeting information in near real time. The aircraft that once flew with 4 crew members managing systems through analog switches now operates closer to a networked node, sharing targeting data with surface ships, AWACS aircraft, and ground controllers simultaneously. But upgrading an aging airframe has costs. The structural stress problems didn't go away, they were managed. The fleet was reduced from 95 airframes to 62, the most worn examples retired, the best preserved ones kept flying. Each surviving aircraft gets periodic depot-level teardown inspections that take months and cost tens of millions of dollars. In 2019, the fleet was grounded due to ejection seat system defects. All of them. For months. The Air Force flew essentially 0 B-1B sorties for a period that would have been unthinkable during peak combat operations. The McDonnell Douglas Aces II ejection seat had a flaw in the on-aircraft version, a design deviation from the standard seat that created a risk of seat pan failure during ejection. Across a fleet of aircraft this old, catching that kind of problem requires tearing into every single aircraft. The B-1B community, the pilots, the weapons systems officers, the maintainers, has lived with this for 40 years. The aircraft is notoriously demanding on the ground. Availability rates that would be acceptable on simpler aircraft are celebrated on the Lancer. Every operational squadron will tell you the aircraft has a personality. That sounds like mythology, but it isn't. Complex systems that operate near their design margins develop patterns. The B-1B has patterns. The aircraft is also loud, pathologically loud. The 4 F-101 engines in full afterburner produce over 150 decibels at the flight line. A physical presence, not just a sound. Ground crews wear double hearing protection as standard. In 2016, and again in 2018, B-1Bs were deployed to the Pacific. Flights over the South China Sea. Flights down the east coast of North Korea. Not bombing runs, presence missions. The message in those missions was precise. We have an aircraft that can reach you from Guam or from the continental United States with refueling, carry 75,000 pounds of precision weapons, and return. That message was heard. The 2017 strike on Syria. 59 Tomahawk missiles from U.S. Navy destroyers was the headline. But B-1Bs flew that night as well, on standby overwatch, weapons loaded, waiting for a call that never came. That is the aircraft's shadow role. In 2018, when the U.S. struck Syrian chemical weapons facilities, B-1Bs dropped 19 JASSMs, the weapon's first operational use in combat. The strike validated years of integration work in a single night. Every one of those JASSMs hit within meters of its planned impact point. The aircraft didn't enter Syrian airspace. It launched from standoff range over the Mediterranean, and the weapons flew themselves to the targets. The B-21 Raider is coming. The Air Force intends it to eventually replace both the B-1B and the B-2. The first B-21 flew in November 2023. The production line is active. The transition has begun. But the B-1B will not disappear quickly. The Air Force's current plan keeps the Lancer flying until at least 2036. That is 50 years of operational service for an aircraft that was meant to fly one war that never happened. Why does it persist? Because the B-21, for all its sophistication, will initially be a small fleet. Stealth platforms cost money. Building enough to replace 62 B-1Bs takes years and billions. The Lancer fills the gap, and the B-1B still does something the B-21 cannot, not yet. It carries the LRASM in volume. It carries the JASSM-ER in volume. It is a magazine, not just a platform, and magazine capacity is what a Pacific conflict scenario demands. That is the final paradox of the B-1B. The aircraft nobody wanted, that was built for a mission that never happened, that was stripped of its purpose by treaty, that was nearly retired 4 separate times, is now central to the Pacific deterrence strategy that defines American military posture in the 2020s. The machine didn't stay relevant because someone had a vision for it. It stayed relevant because its fundamental engineering, the payload, the range, the airframe volume, turned out to be the right answer for problems nobody had anticipated when the blueprints were drawn. That is what the B-1B actually teaches, not a lesson about American will or defense spending or politics. A lesson about what happens when an airframe is large enough and capable enough at its core to absorb 40 years of missions it was never asked to imagine. If you want to understand how air power actually works, not the strategy, the machine itself, we cover that on this channel every week. Subscribe, and you'll catch the next one.